Tuesday afternoon to you. Thanks for joining Sports4CLE. Hope your day's off to a great start. We're going to be joined a little bit later by Tim Bielik. Take a look at some of the teams in the AFC who could challenge the Browns for the AFC title this year, as well as talk a little bit about the Browns and maybe the biggest secret weapon that the Browns have on their roster. We're also going to talk with Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter. Plenty of Browns discussion. Let's welcome in Dan Labbe, plain dealer beat reporter for the Browns, as well as here on cleveland.com. And Dan, Bleacher Report had the top 25 moves of the offseason. Number one move was the Chiefs trading for the offensive tackle Orlando Brown Jr. The Browns have 4 of the top 25, including number 3, trading up to be able to draft Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. What do you think of that move by Andrew Berry?
I loved the move. I loved the thought process behind the move. A little surprised to see it that high up on the list, but I did absolutely love the idea of identifying a player that they might have even taken at 26 had the cornerbacks not been there. And so to use some of those draft assets and move up and get Owusu-Koramoah, who I think they view as this next generation type linebacker, a guy that can fit that versatile scheme, do a bunch of different things, you know, wear a weird number and make it hard for the quarterback to identify exactly what he's going to do on any given play. I really think that was a great move by the Browns to go up and do that. So not surprised at all to see that on the list, nor am I surprised at the Chiefs going out and getting a tackle being number 1 on the list. Their remade offensive line has to be one of the stories of the offseason.
The other thing, number 10 on that list, is the signing of Troy Hill. So again, top 25. Browns have 10, the signing of Troy Hill, and 3 trading up for JOK.
Troy Hill has sort of become the forgotten man in everything that's happened since free agency. John Johnson, of course, gets the headlines. He was the big free agent signing. Greg Newsome was the first-round pick. We just talked about Owusu-Koramoah and how the Browns might view him, but Troy Hill is a really important piece as the guy that's going to play the slot. But even more important, Denzel Ward, who has missed 4 games every single season. Greg Newsome, who dealt with injuries at Northwestern. Greedy Williams, who's coming off of a nerve injury. They're going to need a guy like Troy Hill who can slide outside and play on the outside in certain situations when they need him to do that. So Troy Hill really may be a forgotten man, I think, since free agency, but he can intercept the football, and he took 2 to the house last year.
So we have trading up for JOK 3, signing of Troy Hill, number 10. Number 11, the signing of the aforementioned John Johnson. This is Bleacher Report's top 25 moves of the offseason.
So I would probably put Johnson ahead of Hill, even make that just because of the significance of it. Maybe higher up than any of the other moves on the list. But again, just adding that dynamic playmaker in the back end of the defense. We saw how much the safety position struggled last year. Even as Carl Joseph started to play a little bit better, it still just wasn't good enough. So to go out, get maybe the top safety on the market, steal him from the top defense in the NFL, a team that you never know. If you get to LA in February, you might have to compete against them. So to bring him in, it changes the culture here because he's a leader on that back end of the defense. He's going to be a little bit like what Jarvis Landry was when he first got here to Cleveland on the offensive side. So this should be on the list. I would actually probably put it higher up on the list. I feel like maybe there's a little recency bias on this list, maybe.
And this one's a little bit of a surprise. So the fourth one of the Browns moves in the top 25, and I mentioned they had 4. This one's the other side of the ball. They have the re-signing of Rashard Higgins as the 24th best move of the offseason in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this one. And it's nothing against Rashard Higgins. It's nothing against bringing him back. I think it was the smart thing to do and the right thing to do. I just still am not 100% sure what his role is going to be. And I know that's a little strange because he had such a great year last year, but he really had to wait his turn last year. The Browns were kind of only playing him in garbage time and leaving him inactive early in the season until he was sort of forced on the field and showing them what to do. I don't know if these coaches are going to start to fall in love again with some of the traits guys on this roster, like a Donovan Peoples-Jones or even a Kadero Hodge, who was going to be the number 3 receiver last year out of camp. I like bringing back Higgins. I think you had to bring him back. Of course, he's a fan favorite. Fans absolutely love it. I don't know if he necessarily belongs on this list, but Browns fans aren't going to complain about having him back in the orange or brown this year.
Well, and again, so the Browns have the 3rd, 10th, 11th, and 24th best moves in the offseason. The roster upgrade is pretty significant, as evidenced by that. And I think when you look at this roster on paper, it's pretty darn good.
It really is. And the thing about all those moves is they made sense. Bringing in John Johnson made sense. We talked about the trade up for Owusu-Koramoah. Shoring up your slot corner position, bringing back one of your most productive receivers from a year ago. All of these moves made sense. These weren't just big splashes for the sake of big splashes. And, it just speaks now when you look over this roster, it's really hard to kind of find the areas where you're kind of nitpicking, I guess, right? Do they need more depth here? If there's an injury here, what's going to happen? But it's really hard to find just the glaring holes on this roster.
When you look at the whole body of the upgrade, what do you think Andrew Berry did in terms of traits? What traits did he add to this defense in particular?
I think the word of this offseason was versatility. He wanted guys that could do a lot of different things. John Johnson is a safety, but he can also come up and play in the box and be a little bit of a linebacker. Owusu-Koramoah can do everything. Troy Hill can play inside and he can play outside. Even some of the defensive linemen they brought in, Jadeveon Clowney, you can slide him to the inside if you want. Malik Jackson, you can play him on the edge if you want to do that. So I think versatility was really the name of the game this offseason for the Browns, to create a defense where it's going to be hard, not just game to game, but play to play, to identify what a guy's role is going to be.
So let's shift our focus a little bit, and we're going to take a look. Peter King made his name with Sports Illustrated, very well-known national sports writer for a number of years. Came out with his power rankings in the NFL. Chiefs 1, Buccaneers 2, Bills 3. Browns check in at number 4. And again, keep in mind, this is a guy that's well connected within NFL circles, has been covering the game for a long time, knows what a Super Bowl type franchise looks like. What do you make of the Browns being ranked there?
I'm surprised to see them this high, especially ahead of some of the teams they're ahead of. Baltimore is a team that, I guess it's how do you put these things together, right? Is it all projecting? Is it all kind of looking back? And Baltimore is the one team the Browns were unable to get past last year. And maybe if the two teams had met in the playoffs, it would have been different. But that was the one team they couldn't beat. For me, I still just kind of need to see it before I'm ready to write down that the Browns should be ahead of the Ravens. I think they're really close, as we saw in that Monday night game. But again, even if you think 4 is a little high, Peter King makes an interesting case similar to what we were just saying. How many holes are really on this roster? And if everything kind of goes right, the Browns are probably going to end up being one of the final 4 teams. So I get why he put them there. For me, I just need to see a little bit more on the field before I'm ready to put them that high.
The other thing that is becoming very apparent, AFC is going to be brutal when you look at the Bills, the Browns, the Chiefs, the Ravens, and you can throw a couple more young and up-and-coming teams in there. The AFC is kind of loaded in comparison to the NFC.
And it's going to all come down to the quarterbacks and the young quarterbacks and what they're able to do. Patrick Mahomes, I think you can just kind of write him in as he's going to be the best quarterback in football again, or one of them. But, what's the next step for Lamar Jackson? He won the MVP a couple years ago, and for various reasons took steps back last year. He also got COVID, and I think that affected him a little bit at the end of the year. Still a guy that can make plays. So what's his next step? What's next for Josh Allen? Does he continue on his trajectory? Or does he revert back to maybe what we've seen from him in the past? And of course, Baker Mayfield, what's he going to be in year 4? I think that's going to decide how a lot of this shakes out.
Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter for The Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, Dan and I will take a look at the PFF Pro Football Focus rankings for the tackles as well as the edge rushers. Also, some next-gen stats for cornerbacks. Sports4CLE. You'll be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Sports4CLE continues. I'm Dave Bacon. We continue talking Browns football with Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com, Dan Labbe. Dan, Pro Football Focus, analytics-driven website, ranked the edge rushers, the top 25. Khalil Mack, number 1. TJ Watt, number 2. Joey Bosa, number 3. Checking in at number 4, Myles Garrett. Do you think that's a little low? What do you make of Garrett being ranked as the 4th best edge rusher in football?
So I think it's sort of a battle of production versus, I don't know if I want to say potential, but talent. You know, Garrett, I think, is the most talented edge rusher in football. And I think if you're going based purely on that, he's got to be number 1 on this list. But, you know, every year something has come up, right? He had an ankle injury his rookie year. He got COVID last year. I mean, he was on pace last year for an amazing season. Through the first 9 games, he had 9.5. He was going to break the Browns sack record. And I think he would have established himself as, you know, maybe the best edge rusher in football. So I think he's trending the right direction. I don't know that I would put him 4th. I would move him up the list just based on what I think he can be if he plays a full, healthy season, and based on what we saw last year with his ability to get to the quarterback and not just bring guys down, but create turnovers, which I know is something that he really emphasizes. And you see that big paw coming down and the strip sack following. It's going to be sort of the signature of Myles Garrett moving forward. So I don't think it's going to be long before he's number 1 on a list like this.
The other thing is Jadeveon Clowney did make that list. The guy that the Browns signed has some injury history. He's ranked 20th best edge rusher in the NFL.
And Clowney's one of those guys where you've really got to take into account the pressure he creates, because throughout his career, he's never really put up the big sack numbers. And so just from that, you know, raw stat, he's been disappointing as a number 1 pick. But consistently year after year, he has managed to create pressures. Now, last year in Tennessee was a little weird. He was dealing with injuries, but you even go back to his year in Seattle, he was really good creating pressure. And I think he and Garrett are going to really benefit each other. I think you'll see a lot of plays where one creates the pressure and the other gets the sack.
All right, we're going to move on. Pro Football Focus also ranked the offensive tackles according to their analytics-driven grades. Number 1 overall, David Bakhtiari from Green Bay. Number 2, Trent Williams. And Jack Conklin checks in as the 12th ranked tackle in football. So the right tackle of the Browns ranked 12th best.
And I think you'll take that. You paid him a lot of money to come here and shore up that spot. You could make an argument that Jack Conklin maybe was the best player on the Browns last year if you're really into right tackle play and breaking down all the nuances of what goes into that position. He really came in and stabilized that side of the line. You know, number 12, if that's where your right tackle lands, you're in pretty good shape.
Now, Jedrick Wills not on the list of the top 25 that they ranked. How important is it for him to kind of develop and move up that list? I mean, keep in mind they switched him from, you know, right to left, and that's a bigger deal than most people realize. How important is it for him to kind of take that next step?
It's huge. And I always thought it was a little strange. His grade on PFF I know was low, but just, that eyeball test and seeing what it meant to have a guy out there that you could rely on. And I thought he was really good in some running plays, sealing the edges for Nick Chubb. And so I think there was a little disconnect maybe between what PFF graded him and just kind of watching him on a week-to-week basis. The key last year was you just didn't want him to go out there and be a mess. Making that transition, not having an offseason program, the recipe was there for it to just not go well for him his rookie year. But the Browns were willing to throw him out there, and I thought he responded well. I thought he showed you that he can lock down that position for a long time. Is he ever going to be the best left tackle in football? I don't know. I don't think he needs to be. He just needs to be consistent, show up every week, and make sure that left side, Baker Mayfield's blind side, is protected.
It'll be interesting to see his development just from the standpoint of he gets a year of Bill Callahan actually being able to work with him in non-game plan settings. Remember, once you get in the regular season, you're doing mostly game planning, and I mean there's certain drills, but he is going to be drilled on the technique that Bill Callahan is looking for pretty extensively coming up here.
Yeah, it really helps to have a guy who's probably the best offensive line coach in football. And the other thing that you hope to start getting and you really hope to have in training camp is he's going to be able to sit in that room with Joel Bitonio and Jack Conklin and J.C. Treader and all of these other guys that have been around. He's going to be in that offensive line room, and he's going to be able to learn from them and pick their brains. He's not going to be sitting at home on Zoom, where it's really difficult to do some of that stuff. So I think just being around that group and all those guys having, we talk about continuity for Baker. I think it matters that there's continuity on the offensive line. That's really hard to establish, and to have 5 guys that have played essentially a full season together, a couple injuries here and there, I think that's really enormous for his development.
All right, we're going to move on. Let's take a look at this. This one's actually a tweet. Next Gen Stats ranked the ball hawk rate for cornerbacks, and filling in the top spot, Denzel Ward, 24.3% ahead of Xavier Howard and Darius Phillips and Bradbury. You see the top-ranked 5 there. Minimum of 40 targets. That means you're around the ball, you're breaking on the ball. And again, when Denzel Ward is on the field, he is outstanding. Got to find a way to keep him on the field more, but that just speaks to the ball skills of Denzel Ward.
Yeah, and I love stats like this. I think that's where we need to really kind of get things figured out in football, because I think with defensive backs, we rely so much on interceptions. But Denzel Ward has never been a high interception guy necessarily. I think we'll see the same thing with Greg Newsome, right? He's never been a high interception guy, but Pat Fitzgerald just raved about his ball skills. So I love seeing Denzel Ward at the top of this list, because I know when I watch him play, I see a guy that's a really good corner. Then you start pointing at the interception numbers and things like that. And look, corners are going to have bad moments where they get beat and they look really bad. Denzel has a few of those, but he can also lock guys down. And I think he has a chance he'll probably get paid this offseason. And I think, within the next few years, people are going to start mentioning his name as one of the top corners in the league. Along, like we said with Myles Garrett earlier, I think he's got that potential, and it's good to see him making it to the top of this list, because I think he deserves it.
Browns beat reporter Dan Labbe and I are going to step aside and take a quick time out. We will continue talking Browns. Should the Browns pursue Julio Jones? He's definitely available. We'll talk about that. We will also pick Dan's mind. How many games, Dan, do you think the Browns will win this season? Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Sports4CLE continues. Thanks for hanging with us. I'm Dave Bacon. The Atlanta Falcons have made it known throughout NFL circles. Wide receiver Julio Jones is eminently available. There's some speculation might be had for a second-round pick. Let's bring Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter, back in. Beat reporter for the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com, covering the Browns. Should the Browns pursue Julio Jones? It's kind of attractive if it's only a second-round pick.
It would be really difficult to turn that sort of offer down. Obviously, he makes a lot of money, and it feels like you'd maybe have to make a decision on one of your high-priced receivers if you brought in Julio Jones. But look, the guy, aside from last year when he dealt with that hamstring issue that he just couldn't quite get over, he's been healthy. You got to go back to like 2013 to see a significant number of missed games. He's basically played 14, 15, 16 games almost every year of his career. He's the type of big receiver you like. He's 6'3". The Browns don't really have a body like that in that wide receiver room, especially, for a guy as accomplished as him. Yes, he's a little older, 32 years old, but if it took a second-round pick to get him, and you're sitting there comparing him with Odell Beckham Jr., who's coming off an ACL, who hasn't been able to stay healthy, and you'd have to at least think about it. And I would give it serious consideration.
Now, nationally, the Browns are being connected the dots with him because they have the cap space to do it, and they also view it as the Browns are close. Is that the type of move that could potentially, shove the Browns even a step closer to where they want to be, which was the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, adding a player with the talent of Julio obviously helps you and makes you better. I think ultimately the two things that are going to matter most for this team trying to win a Super Bowl is Baker Mayfield's development and the defense. Well, Julio helps you with Baker Mayfield taking that next step now to becoming a solidified top 10 quarterback. And I think having a bigger guy with that type of ability, that type of catch radius, he can make the spectacular catch. It would only make Baker Mayfield a better quarterback. And, you always talk about a wide receiver room like a basketball team, right? And so you have some small guys, some big guys, fast guys, and Julio Jones really would come in and I think fit with all the body types the Browns have in that room perfectly.
All right, we've talked about what a addition he would be, how much it would be, a fit that the Browns don't have. Do you think they do it?
I don't think they do. That I would be a little surprised. I think continuity is a big thing for this football team right now. And so they're going to be aggressive and they're going to go out and add people, which we've seen. But I just think on the offensive side of the ball, they've spoken so much about continuity. And frankly, they've given Odell Beckham Jr. a huge vote of confidence. He's still on this roster. He's still a part of this team. They obviously believe in his rehab, that he can come back and be healthy. And if this team has told us one thing, it's, pay attention to their actions, right? Actions speak louder than words. And keeping Odell Beckham Jr. around, not trading him or moving on from him, it tells me that they believe he can come back and be the receiver that they thought he could be back when John Dorsey made that deal a few years ago. So I would look at it. I would take those calls from Atlanta. I don't know that the Browns would pull the trigger on that deal.
All right. I know you've written on this subject. It is May 25th. How many games do you think the Browns win in 2021 here on May 25th?
I mean, conservatively, I would say, I mean, I could get to 12 pretty easily in my head. I would put them right in that 11 to 12 range. So I'll just take the higher number, I guess, and go 12-5. This schedule is really interesting. If you look at last year's records, it's kind of a difficult schedule. But if you look at some of the, projected win totals from Vegas and other sites, it's actually not as difficult as maybe it looks. It's going to come down to sort of how they do against Baltimore and how Pittsburgh looks and all of that. But, I've seen their over under as low as 9.5. And I just don't see this team as a 9-8 or 10-7 football team. I think this is at least an 11 to 12 win team. So I'll take that 12.
And we have to remember it's 17 games, so you got the extra game in there, and you did well with the game, the math to 17. Let's talk real quickly contract extensions. Browns have a number of guys coming up that they're going to have to do something with. Who do you think they deal with this offseason? There's a window coming up, and many people think the release of Sheldon Richardson is so you can do some things, rolling cap numbers over and extending people out. Who do you think they take care of in this offseason extension-wise?
My two priorities would be Denzel Ward first and then Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is a free agent after next season, so I think he needs to be on that list. But Denzel Ward, your cornerback, we talked about him earlier in the show, how good he's been. Those would be kind of my first two priorities to get something done with those guys, especially if you can do like a 4-year deal with Chubb for that $12 to $13 million number, pay for those prime years and then kind of make decisions after that year to year. And Ward would obviously be a pretty massive extension at the cornerback position. I'm really curious how they're going to approach Baker Mayfield, because there's an argument to be made that you get something done early. Maybe it's not going to be as expensive. If he comes back and he plays like a top 10 or even top 5 quarterback next year, you might be paying him Dak Prescott money. So I'm curious to see how they'll approach that. But I would prioritize those other two guys first.
Yeah, the other thing about Denzel Ward is he's been kind of banged up. If he stays healthy and has the type of year he's capable of having, you may be running into the same thing with him if you don't get that deal done, that you end up paying him significantly more than you would have if you lock him up now.
Yeah, that's true. And it's like kind of that old baseball model, right? We saw the Indians do it back in the mid-90s. We've seen other baseball teams just through the years follow that lead. Get those extensions done early. Give guys that security. And on the NFL, it's not security as much as it is, kind of get them that upfront money as soon as possible. But it's the same sort of concept, right? Get some guys done early. Maybe it's not going to be quite as costly. It becomes a little more cap friendly down the road. And the good thing for Browns fans that they need to remember is even the extensions the Browns do this offseason, they aren't going to necessarily kick in right away. So this team should still have some cap flexibility moving forward. Even with Miles getting done last year and maybe a couple big guys getting done this year, those extensions, it might be a year or two before they really kick in and cost serious dollars against the cap.
And the other good thing for Browns fans is that cap's going up because of the expansive billions of dollars that's coming in because of the media rights that the NFL has signed. Dan Labbe and I, Browns beat reporter for cleveland.com, as well as the Plain Dealer, are going to step aside, take a quick time out. On the other side of the break, Dan's written a couple of articles about the Browns' assistant coaches, how we kind of reflect the culture, the way they coach, as well as how their paths have been very different. We're going to dive into that. Browns assistant coaches when Sports4CLE returns. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just the mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Sports for CLE continues. I'm Dave Bacon. We continue talking Browns football with Dan Labbe, Plain Dealer, and cleveland.com's Browns beat reporter. Dan, you've written a couple of articles on the Browns assistant coaches. One of them is how the Browns culture is reflected in the development of the assistant coaches. Take us through that and what you found.
It's something I've been really interested in as last season kind of went along. And this Browns coaching staff has obviously some veterans like Bill Callahan and Joe Woods, but there's a lot of young coaches on this staff. Callie Brownson, Drew Petzing. We can just go through a list of young up-and-coming guys that Kevin Stefanski and Joe Woods brought in. And I think coach development, we love to talk about player development, but I think this is an organization really centered around coach development, which does two things. One, it shows young coaches you come to Cleveland, you're going to get developed, and you can go on and do bigger and better things elsewhere. But the other part of that is when that happens, so when a coordinator leaves to be a head coach or a position coach leaves to be a coordinator, you've got people in the building who are ready to move up and step into those roles. So it's very much a culture of giving coaches opportunities to get better, to learn things. And, eventually, look, everybody wants to be a coordinator or a head coach, eventually get to where they want to get to in the league.
You kind of touch on it. It's very interesting because there are a couple coaches, like Mike Prefer's been around forever. A head coach, Bill Callahan has been a head coach, been there, done that. I'm not sure that he's actively pursuing that again. But it's a young organization that kind of, when you look at Andrew Berry is young, Kevin Stefanski, a young head coach. So it's very interesting that there is youth that they are still trying to develop kind of a succession plan, if you will.
Yeah, and I think because of the youth of the staff in the front office and the coaching staff, it's a very open-minded organization, and there's a lot of open doors in the building. Obviously, with COVID, all these guys weren't together all the time. But, guys are able to go into, a coach is able to go sit down with Andrew Berry and chat with him, or even go into Paul DePodesta's office when he's in the building. There aren't these barriers put up. Guys spend a lot of time together, talking through things. They want ideas. As Drew Petzing put it to me, if you have 30 guys with different ideas, that's okay, because the goal is to have all those ideas and have someone like Kevin Stefanski be able to take them and make sense of them and kind of decide, what he wants to use. And that's sort of how you develop as an organization. And that's really the impression I got in talking with some of these assistants.
It's almost like it's and it's not surprising because you have a couple of Ivy League educated guys. It's like it's being run like a Fortune 500 company. Come on in, let's sit down, we'll have a little think tank, and we'll decide what the best course of action is going forward. Is that the sense that from what I'm hearing you say, that's kind of the way this organization is being driven?
Yeah, it's not guys looking over their shoulders, and it is guys being willing to put their ideas out there and let people hear them. And the other piece of that is, of course, you've got to have strong leadership at the top who's willing to kind of take all of that stuff and filter out maybe some of the bad ideas or some of the things that just might not work. And that's where Andrew and Kevin and Paul come in. But it is that open-mindedness and that willingness to not only be teachers, but to bring in a bunch of ideas, because look, this offense might look different this year. And a big part of that is because Kevin Stefanski tasked his coaches to go out and get better and learn new things. And you bring that back into your building. And like you said, it's like a Fortune 500 company or a think tank or whatever you want to call it. You're just marinating all these ideas, and Kevin Stefanski can kind of choose what he likes out of them.
The other thing that you did is some of the assistants that were on different paths. Again, that's kind of fascinating. What did you find out? What was the thing that you liked about that aspect of it?
I think the big thing is once you kind of get in football, it's really hard to get out. There were guys that played and got hurt and thought maybe they'd go on to be orthopedic surgeons, because those are people who helped them out in their journeys. And it's just, they got opportunities to coach and they took them. I mentioned Drew Petzing a couple times. He's from the same town as Ben Bloom, who's on the defensive side of the ball. Petzing is the tight ends coach. They both were kind of on their way into finance and business, and then they got opportunities to coach and get their foot in the door. And even though it doesn't pay particularly well and you got to do really menial tasks early on, just being part of that team and being around the game and teaching the game was just too much for a lot of these guys to pass up. And that's sort of what this Browns staff is littered with, just coaches who maybe were going a different direction, but then they ended up getting into football and made connections with Stefanski, Andrew Berry, whoever along the way, and now they're in the Browns building.
When you did this, what was the most interesting or the biggest message that you took away from doing those two stories?
I think the big thing, just from an individual standpoint, was, again, football was just really important to these guys. And even though it was going to be hard to get into, it was one of those things where it's like, I just don't want to regret not doing this, right? And so they decided not to go into finance. They decided not to get that business degree. They decided to work at a Division III college and work their way into the NFL and make as many connections as they could along the way. From a culture standpoint, we've heard so many stories over the years of a Browns building just divided and not really being a development focused building, not being willing to develop guys and put them in positions to move on. And I think that's the biggest thing is you actually do have, they talk about collaboration. They talk about being on the same page. I think it's real. I don't think it's just lip service here. I think Kevin Stefanski cares about his coaches as people, as professionals. And I think you're going to see that continue to grow and develop and manifest itself on the field. And the other part of this too is these guys are real player focused and they're real focused on teaching and making sure that their players are getting better too. So I think that's a big reason for the success that they're having early on.
Dan Labbe, Browns beat reporter for the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. You can read about the culture that the assistant coaches show us as well as how they were on different paths, both of those on cleveland.com. And go ahead and read them. Interesting reads. Dan, as always, appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, Dan Labbe, a Browns beat reporter for cleveland.com. We're going to step aside, take a quick timeout. On the other side of the break, Tim Bielik will join us. We'll take a look at some of the teams that the Browns are going head-to-head with in the AFC to come away with that AFC championship and potentially a Super Bowl berth. Sports4CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tric-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Welcome back to Sports4CLE. I'm Dave Bacon. We continue talking Browns football, and we are going to welcome in Tim Bielik. He is a reporter for cleveland.com as well as the Plain Dealer. Tim, appreciate the time. So Peter King, longtime national NFL reporter, made his fame with Sports Illustrated, put out his NFL power rankings this week. He had the Chiefs 1, the Buccaneers 2, the Bills 3, and the Browns 4. What do you make of that? Browns being in that top 4, if you will.
It's amazing, again, how far this team has come in so few years. I mean, It shows just the respect that they got for making the playoffs last year, getting into the second round, really giving the Chiefs a bit of a push. And it's a fair spot, I think, in the hierarchy of the AFC. I think the Chiefs are clearly number one. I would have the Browns and Bills kind of number two, kind of battling it out for that second spot all season. It's going to be interesting to see, how that battle fares out, because obviously they're not going to play each other until potentially the playoffs at the earliest.
It is kind of loaded in the AFC when you look at it. There's the Chiefs, the Bills, the Browns. You have the Ravens. You can never really discount the Steelers. I know nationally some people are looking past them. That's an organization that just seems to find a way to win. But the AFC is kind of top heavy this year, it seems. Did you see that when you're doing your research?
Yeah, I did. And obviously I look at just, I started on Monday, talking about the Chiefs and the way they built up in the offseason, having to fix the offensive line. And the fascinating thing is, I think, is seeing the teams that in this series have built themselves this offseason different ways. Some teams have had to make massive moves. We've talked about, of course, the Chiefs having to rebuild essentially the entire offensive line, the Ravens adding some skill players to try and give Lamar Jackson some help, and other teams like the Bills who really didn't do a whole lot because, quite honestly, they didn't need to. It's interesting, those team building philosophies that are kind of working in there, and it proves that I don't think there's one specific path, to build a winning football team.
Now, you're going through and doing a series on teams that the Browns are going to be contending with for the AFC. So I know you mentioned the Chiefs. When you looked closely at them, what did you see, and what are some of the areas they've upgraded? You touched on it, and some of the areas of concern still for the Chiefs.
The offensive line is obviously the big one. They lost both their tackles in the playoffs, and we all saw what it meant to them in that Super Bowl loss to the Buccaneers. So they go out and replace it in force. They signed Joe Thuney in free agency. They brought Kyle Long out of retirement. And, of course, the big one, trading for Orlando Brown Jr. from the Ravens, who can now be the left tackle. Under the radar move as well, and signing Jaron Reed at defensive tackle to play alongside Chris Jones, and what is still, I think, a very good defensive line. I still think there's questions in the back seven for the Chiefs. But, we saw a guy like L'Jarius Sneed really have a huge impact in the playoffs. We all know about the Honey Badger at safety, how good he is. Offensively for the Chiefs, there's not a lot of weaknesses. Maybe finding a true third option receiver. Maybe it's Mecole Hardman. Maybe it's Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a running back receiver combination. But that offense just doesn't have a lot of questions. Defense, there are some in the passing game. This is an offensive league, the way it's been trending. And they have one of the most unstoppable offenses I think we've ever seen.
Well, and Patrick Mahomes can hide some of those question marks on offense too. There aren't many guys that can do what Patrick Mahomes is doing at quarterback.
Exactly. And when I've talked to friends, family, or whatever, I refer to him as kind of the LeBron of the NFL. And I think that's kind of where he is. He's as transcendent a guy as we've seen. The Super Bowl against the Buccaneers was really the first time in his entire career I think we've seen him have a bad game. And that wasn't really his fault. It was the fact that the offensive line couldn't hold up, and he was essentially running for his life. And even when he did run for his life, he was still making tremendous throws. And it was actually really impressive to watch the things he was able to do out there, all things considered.
Now, when you look at the Bills, what did you see? You mentioned they didn't do a whole lot. When you look at the Bills, what do you see from that team?
Continuity. And I think that's a big thing going on with Buffalo is, they added a couple nice pieces. You look at the offense, they really didn't need to add a lot, but they signed a couple guys with experience of playing in the Super Bowl. Got Emmanuel Sanders out there as another option in the receiving game. And then they signed Matt Breida for more depth at running back. But I think their offseason can be defined by two big moves. Brian Daboll coming back. He was getting overtures and interviews for head coaching jobs, but no one hired him. He decided to go back. And then Matt Milano, I think, was the big one. He was one of the top linebackers in free agency. And not only did he stay in Buffalo, but I think he essentially got a hometown discount to stay there. So that was huge for them. They added some interesting pass rushing depth in the draft with Gregory Rousseau and Carlos Basham Jr. in the first two rounds. Basham, I think, is a guy that can help more right now. Rousseau's a guy that maybe has higher potential, could do a little more down the line.
When you look at Josh Allen, he took a huge leap forward a year ago. Do you expect him to continue on that trajectory, or is there, a little correction potentially headed for Josh Allen?
I think there could certainly be some correction going his way. I mean, obviously he put up tremendous numbers. The trade for Stephon Diggs proved to be a home run. It gave him a legitimate number one option at receiver, and he really blossomed as a result of that. I do think, his performance against the Chiefs shows that there are still some warts to his game. I think he's got the ability to fix those, especially, again, with the fact that he's got that continuity I talked about with Brian Daboll coming back. Those two know each other very well. They've worked together since Josh Allen was drafted, so you can't say enough, I think, for that continuity. But I'm curious how that's going to continue now with more tape on him, now that teams have seen what he can do. I wonder if there's going to be more of an adjustment, and not to mention the fact that they're going to be playing a first-place schedule this year.
Now, the other thing is you've done the Chiefs and the Bills. What's coming up in this series? You're doing a series of teams that the Browns could be contending with for the AFC. Who's coming up in this series?
Well, tomorrow I'm talking about Baltimore, and I'm really centering on the fact that they've really helped Lamar Jackson in free agency. They had to trade Orlando Brown Jr., but they supplemented it by signing Kevin Zeitler and Alejandro Villanueva on the offensive line. They signed Sammy Watkins at receiver, draft Rashad Bateman. So I'm really diving into how they really improved on that side of the football. Coming up later in the week, I'll talk about the Colts as well, how they have really an improved roster and how they had one of the better rosters in football, I should say. And it's how 2021 is going to be all about. Can Frank Reich help Carson Wentz rediscover, his early career form? And Friday is going to be the interesting one. This is kind of the wild card, I think, of the teams that could really surprise everybody and challenge the Browns to the NFC. And I think that's the Miami Dolphins. I mean, this was a team 2 years ago that everybody thought was going to tank. There was the whole tank for Tua thing coming out of Miami. And all they've done the last 2 years is absolutely overachieve. I mean, nobody thought they were going to win 5 games in 2019. Nobody thought they were going to be within one game of making the playoffs in 2020. That defense is awesome. I love what they did in the draft with the first 2 picks. Jalen Waddle, just a really fun option to help out Tua Tagovailoa in the passing game. Jalen Phillips, there's injury history, but I love the tools he has. And that defense is only going to get better. And I just think now that you've got a lot of options out there to help out Tua, I think what's going to be important for them is stabilizing coaching. I mean, not pulling him whenever something goes wrong, giving him a chance to learn. And with him potentially being the guy there, I'm curious what that does for his development.
You touched on the Ravens a little bit and all the upgrades they've made, around Lamar. They lost a lot on defense. Does that concern you at all? Are they concerned about that at all, or is that something that they had backups that can work around that? Do you think?
I think it's concerning from an edge rushing perspective. I look at, obviously, they lost Matt Judon and Yannick Ngakoue to unrestricted free agency. They have a couple of veterans back, Pernell McPhee, Tyus Bowser, Jalen Ferguson, but they only combined for about 7 sacks. That's why they go out and draft Odafe Owe in the first round out of Penn State, even though he didn't have a sack in 2020, just absolutely dripping in athletic tools. And a guy that I think is a very good fit for Baltimore's defense. He could be a rotational guy from day one. I'm fascinated at how he fits, but it's weird. We've talked before about, for example, how it's weird to think of the Steelers not having a dominant running game. It's weird to think about the Ravens not having a dominant pass rusher. I mean, they've had Terrell Suggs, Elvis Dumerville throughout times in the past. So it's kind of weird that they don't have that one guy that you really had to have all your attention on every time you go line up and you're trying to see, okay, who's the guy I need to focus on when it comes to pass protection.
Tim Bielik and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. On the other side of the break, we will take a look at who the Bleacher Report thinks is the Browns' best-kept secret on the entire roster. Sports4CLE, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Life is starting to get back on track, and you can too. If you or your family have experienced financial hardship as a result of COVID-19, Tri-C can help with full tuition assistance. Safely get the in-demand degree or training you need with online and on-campus classes. Go to tryc-edu to check out our programs and resources. So, what are you waiting for? Register now for summer classes. Tri-C is where futures begin.
When it comes to selling you a mattress, most retailers are handing you a long line of extra steps that drive up costs and create confusion. At the Original Mattress Factory, we simplify the mattress shopping experience by building mattresses and box springs in our own local factories and selling them direct to you. It's short, sweet, and simply makes sense. So experience more than just a mattress store. Experience an original, the Original Mattress Factory.
Thanks for joining us on Sports for CLE. I'm Dave Bacon. We continue talking football with cleveland.com and Plain Dealer sports reporter Tim Bielik. So, Tim, the Bleacher Report has come up with the best-kept secret on each and every roster. For the Browns, best-kept secret, wide receiver Rashard Higgins. What do you think?
I think it's interesting. Obviously, when it comes to a Cleveland perspective, he's not a secret. The Browns, we've known about him for a few years, obviously, as a security blanket for Baker Mayfield. And when Odell Beckham Jr. went down with that ACL injury against the Bengals, it's obvious, the impact he had. I mean, career year in terms of receiving yards, almost 600. Just a valuable option. I mean, obviously, he's not talked about as much as Beckham and Jarvis Landry for obvious reasons. He's not as dynamic as those two guys, but he's been nothing short of reliable and a guy that when Baker Mayfield needs him, more often than not, he usually makes something happen.
Who would be your best-kept secret? Who do you think on the Browns, from your perspective, would be the best-kept secret?
I'm going to go on defense. I'm going to say Ronnie Harrison. I mean, all the talk this offseason has been, what they've done in the secondary, signing John Johnson, signing Troy Hill, drafting Greg Newsome, all these changes to defense, potentially 9 new starters on that side of the football. But I think what gets overlooked is how well Ronnie Harrison played last year. I look at the PFF grade on him. He's a 76.6. So that's 9th overall among qualified safeties. He had, traded for a 5th round pick. So that was tremendous value for the Browns. The move they made to get him, 24 solo tackles. He had that pick 6 against the Colts last year that absolutely proved to be pivotal in that win. I mean, he's a guy that I think could really figure into a potential 3 safety rotation. There's all the talk about John Johnson, of course. There's all the hype surrounding Grant Delpit, what he's going to be. I think we forget about Harrison and just how important he really was last season.
Let me ask you this. You did a lot of the draft prep, did a lot of mock drafts, and the Browns rookie class. Who do you think is a sneaky guy from that rookie class that the Browns have that could make an impact that maybe is getting overlooked a little bit? People are talking about Newsome. They're talking about JOK. Other than those two, who do you think somebody that could find a way to contribute?
I think Demetric Felton has got a chance to really, get a few snaps and do something. I mean, he's really a wild card in this class, especially in offense. They only drafted one other skill player in Anthony Schwartz. I think we all expected he's going to have some kind of role. Maybe as a gadget player early on, maybe as a guy that they just kind of tell him to go run as deep as you can, as fast as you can, 3 or 4 times a game till he really establishes himself. But I think Felton is fascinating. I mean, this is a guy who, if you look at what he did against Washington State not too long ago, he was an absolute force. He had a 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown, a 94-yard reception for a touchdown. This is a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield, provides a different skill set than Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, complements those guys well as a pure pass-catching option. And he can do a lot of different things, gives you an answer in the return game. I think he's a guy that'll find his way onto the field in a lot of situations. spell Chubb and Hunt the same way I think we saw Dearness Johnson do it a few times, particularly when Chubb went down with an injury. So I'm fascinated to see how he gets used this year.
All right, we're going to move on some of the different teams' secret weapons that you covered. So the Chiefs, they have Demarcus Robinson, wide receiver, as their kind of best kept secret on the Chiefs is Demarcus Robinson. What do you make of that receiver for the Chiefs?
I think it's a good pick for best kept secret. I mean, when you look at this offense for the Chiefs, we all know Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. I'm a big Mecole Hardman fan because I love just his speed, just how explosive it is. We got a taste of that in the AFC divisional game against the Browns. But I think Demarcus Robinson is an interesting guy. He's definitely had some nice catches throughout his career, been a valuable number 3, number 4 option. I'm interested to see how he kind of steps up as that number 3 guy in this Chiefs offense, because with Sammy Watkins gone, I think that moves guys up. That moves Hardman to number 2, Robinson probably up to number 3. So I'm interested in what he is able to do, to be that supplemental piece that really makes teams pay for focusing too much on Hill and Kelce.
So with the Buffalo Bills, it's another wide receiver that they have as the best kept secret. Gabriel Davis. What do you make of that one?
Big dude, big guy, and I think he's just he was a lot of fun to watch. I mean, rookie last year putting up almost 600 yards, 7 touchdowns. I talked before about, the value of Emmanuel Sanders coming in as a veteran number 2 guy. Josh Allen really didn't have a number 2 per se. He had a clear number 1 in Stephon Diggs, but he also had Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis who put up good numbers. He liked to spread the ball around, and I think he's a very interesting player. Obviously, I expect, as a rookie, you should only get better from where he was, but to put up the numbers he did right away is pretty impressive.
Tim Bielik, sports reporter for cleveland.com, as well as the Plain Dealer. Appreciate the time and the insight. Be sure to read it. Tim's series continues as the teams that are going to challenge the Browns for the AFC continues. Tell us what's coming up again this week in that series, Tim.
Yeah, I'm talking tomorrow about the Ravens, how I feel their offense is getting – they got some help on offense from Lamar Jackson after he took a step backward in most of the categories. Thursday is going to be a look at the Colts. Frank Reich reuniting with Carson Wentz in the hopes of turning Wentz's career around. And then Friday, the Dolphins, who have been one of the overachievers in the NFL the last 2 years. Can they do it again with expectations on them? I'll take a look at all 3 of those as we go through the week.
All right. Appreciate the time and the insight. Be sure to check out Tim's series on the contenders in the AFC. Thanks very much, Tim.
You got it.
All right, that'll do it for us on Sports for CLE. Aaron Savali going against the Tigers Tribe, trying to make it 2 in a row in Detroit over the Tigers. Tomorrow, scheduled guests Terry Pluto and Matt Derry. We'll see you again right here, 4 o'clock, Sports for CLE. Have a great night, everybody. We will see you tomorrow.